In the middle of World War II, as armies clashed across Europe, a Polish military unit officially enlisted a bear as one of its own. He was not a mascot, he was not a symbol, he was a soldier, complete with rank, rations, and orders. Before the war was over, that bear would walk into combat and help carry the weapons that shaped history. In September 1939, Poland was crushed from two sides. Nazi Germany invaded from the west. The Soviet Union invaded from the east. Within weeks, the Polish state collapsed, not because its soldiers failed, but because it was overwhelmed by two empires at once. Hundreds of thousands of Polish soldiers were killed, captured, or forced into exile. Many were taken by the Soviets and sent east to labor camps scattered across Siberia and Central Asia. These men would spend years starving, freezing, and barely surviving, unsure if they would ever see freedom again. Everything changed in 1941 when Germany turned on its former ally and invaded the Soviet Union. Suddenly, the Soviets needed friends. An agreement was reached allowing Polish prisoners to be released and reorganized into a fighting force. What emerged was not a normal army. It was a collection of half-starved men, many suffering from disease, trauma, and years of imprisonment. This new Polish force began a long journey south, away from the Soviet Union, through Central Asia and into the Middle East under British supervision. These soldiers were exhausted, displaced, and grieving a country they no longer had. They marched through Iran, Iraq, and Palestine, rebuilding themselves piece by piece. Many had lost families. Some had no idea if anyone they loved was still alive. Morale was fragile. Laughter was rare. Hope came in short supply. It was in Iran in 1942 that something completely unexpected happened. While stationed near the town of Hamadan, Polish soldiers encountered a young boy carrying a small bear cub. The cub had lost its mother, likely killed by hunters. The boy was trying to sell the animal for food or money. The soldiers immediately noticed the cub was malnourished, weak, and frightened. On impulse, they pooled their money and bought the bear. At first, the cub was nothing more than a curiosity. He was small enough to carry in someone's arms. He drank condensed milk from a bottle fashioned out of a vodka container. The soldiers named him Wojtek, a Polish name meaning joyful warrior or happy fighter. At the time, it was meant as a joke. No one imagined the name would one day become literal. Wojtek followed the soldiers everywhere. He slept in their tents, rode in trucks, and learned to recognize individual voices. He bonded particularly closely with the men of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, a logistics unit responsible for transporting ammunition and supplies. In a world defined by loss and uncertainty, the bear became something rare. He became comfort. As Wojtek grew, so did his place within the unit. He learned to stand on his hind legs, wrestle with soldiers, and greet them by placing his paws on their shoulders. He mimicked their behavior constantly. When the men drank beer, he wanted beer. When they smoked cigarettes, he tried to chew them, usually eating the paper and discarding the tobacco. The bear was not trained in any formal sense. He learned simply by watching. But the war did not slow down to accommodate sentiment. In 1943, the Polish unit was ordered to move again, this time toward the Mediterranean theater. British transport regulations posed a serious problem. Animals were not allowed on military ships. Quarantine laws were strict. Pets were forbidden. Wojtek was no longer a small cub who could be hidden. He was growing fast, already powerful, and impossible to smuggle unnoticed. Faced with the possibility of abandoning him, the soldiers found an extraordinary solution. They enlisted him. Wojtek was officially registered as a private in the Polish army. He was given a service number assigned to the 22nd Artillery Supply Company and listed as a soldier rather than an animal. This was not symbolic. It was paperwork. It allowed him to travel with the unit, receive rations, and move freely wherever soldiers were permitted. From that moment on, Wojtek was not a mascot. He was, on record, a soldier. He marched with the men, rode in military convoys, and sailed across the sea with them. British officers who initially objected often changed their minds after meeting him. Wojtek was calm, friendly, and deeply attached to his unit. He showed no aggression toward humans and seemed to understand, in his own way, that these men were his family. By the time the Polish Second Corps arrived in Italy, Wojtek weighed over 400 pounds. The war was about to test everyone involved, and the bear who had once fit in a soldier's arms was about to walk into history alongside them. By the time the Polish unit reached full strength in the Middle East, Wojtek was no longer a novelty. He was routine. He woke when the men woke, followed them to roll call, and wandered freely through the camp as if it were his own territory. Soldiers no longer reacted when they saw a bear walking between tents. It had simply become normal. Wojtek lived exactly as the soldiers lived. He slept where they slept, ate what they ate, and endured the same heat, dust, and exhaustion. When the men drilled, he watched. When they rested, he rested. When they laughed, he seemed to respond in kind, often rearing up on his hind legs and playfully grappling with whoever was closest. Wrestling became one of his favorite activities. Full-grown soldiers would brace themselves as the bear pushed against them, surprisingly gentle but undeniably strong. He quickly learned the rhythms of military life. When trucks started their engines, Wojtek climbed aboard. He preferred riding in open-bed vehicles, standing upright and holding onto the side rails as the convoy moved. Drivers learned to leave space for him, and soon it was expected that the bear would take his place before the truck departed. Food was another shared experience. Wojtek ate fruit, bread, and whatever scraps were available. He developed a fondness for beer after watching soldiers drink it during downtime. When offered a bottle, he would hold it carefully with his paws and drink, often spilling as much as he consumed. Cigarettes fascinated him as well, though he never smoked them properly. He chewed them, swallowed the paper, and discarded the tobacco, leaving amused soldiers shaking their heads. Despite his size, Wojtek was remarkably disciplined. He did not attack people. He did not roam into neighboring units uninvited. He remained loyal to the men who raised him. British officers visiting the camp were often skeptical at first, only to be disarmed when the bear calmly approached and stood upright as if greeting them. Many later recalled Wojtek as one of the most unusual yet reassuring sights of the war. The psychological impact on the soldiers cannot be overstated. These men had endured invasion, imprisonment, starvation, and exile. They had been stripped of their country and forced to fight under foreign command. Wojtek became something that belonged entirely to them. He was a reminder of innocence in a war that had very little of it. Caring for him gave the soldiers a sense of purpose beyond survival. Protecting him felt like protecting a piece of their humanity. As the unit trained and prepared for combat, Wojtek continued to imitate what he saw. When soldiers carried equipment, he followed them, lifting objects in his paws. At first, it was playful imitation. Later, it became something more useful. He learned to carry crates, ammunition boxes, and supplies short distances, seemingly enjoying the work. The men encouraged it, laughing as the bear moved objects larger than any human could lift alone. It was during this period that Wojtek's image began to define the unit itself. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company adopted a new emblem. It depicted a bear carrying an artillery shell. The symbol was not abstract, it reflected daily reality. Wojtek was already doing the same tasks as the men, just with far greater strength. When orders came for the Polish Second Corps to move to Italy, the soldiers knew the war was about to become real in a way it never had before. They were leaving training grounds and entering active combat zones. For many, it meant facing the enemy for the first time since the fall of Poland years earlier. Wojtek went with them. He boarded the transport ship alongside the men, officially listed as a private. Sailors and officers alike watched in disbelief as a bear calmly stood on deck looking out at the sea. He showed no fear of the ship or the water. He remained close to the soldiers, sleeping among them during the voyage. As Italy came into view, the unit prepared for battle. The terrain would be harsh. The enemy would be entrenched. Casualties were inevitable. Wojtek, now fully grown, walked ashore with the men. None of them knew it yet, but the bear who had been adopted for comfort was about to prove his worth under fire. By early 1944, the Polish Second Corps was drawn into one of the most brutal campaigns of the war. Italy's mountainous terrain favored defenders, and German forces had transformed the country into a series of fortified lines. The most formidable of these stood in the path of the Allied advance toward Rome, Monte Cassino. The monastery sat atop steep ground, overlooking narrow valleys and roads that funneled attackers into kill zones. Multiple Allied assaults had already failed. Casualties were staggering. When the Polish units were ordered forward, the men understood exactly what they were being asked to do. This was not symbolic combat. This was a grinding battle of artillery, machine guns, and exposed supply routes. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company was tasked with a dangerous job. Ammunition had to be moved constantly to the front lines. Shells were heavy, awkward, and had to be transported under fire. The terrain made vehicles unreliable. Supply lines were stretched thin. Every shell that reached the guns mattered. Wojtek moved with the unit, as he always had. As the fighting intensified, the bear was no longer just watching. Soldiers began handing him artillery shells, expecting him to drop them or lose interest. Instead, Wojtek did exactly what he had seen the men do countless times. He stood upright, wrapped his forelegs around the shells, and carried them where they were needed. He did not panic at explosions. He did not shy away from noise. He walked steadily back and forth, moving ammunition faster than exhausted men could manage alone. There is no evidence Wojtek understood the concept of war, but he clearly understood his role. He was helping his family. Soldiers later recalled that he seemed energized by the activity, moving repeatedly between supply points without being prompted. His presence did more than move shells, it steadied nerves. In the middle of chaos, seeing the bear calmly doing his job reminded the men that they were not alone. Word spread quickly. Other units began to hear about the bear who carried artillery. Officers who initially dismissed Wojtek as a mascot now acknowledged his usefulness. The emblem of the bear carrying a shell became more than a symbol. It became proof of what the unit had endured together. After weeks of brutal fighting, the Polish Second Corps succeeded where others had failed. Monte Cassino was finally taken. The cost was enormous. Thousands of soldiers were killed or wounded. The victory opened the road to Rome, but for the men who survived, it came at a personal price that would never fully heal. Wojtek survived the battle. As the war moved north and eventually ended, the Polish soldiers faced a new reality. Poland itself was no longer free. It had fallen under Soviet control. Returning home was not an option for many of them. They were soldiers without a country once again. Wojtek went with them into post-war exile. The unit was eventually stationed in Scotland, where Wojtek became a familiar sight to locals. He played with children, wrestled with soldiers, and lived peacefully among the men who had raised him. But military life could not last forever. As units disbanded, decisions had to be made about the bear's future. In 1947, Wojtek was moved to the Edinburgh Zoo. The transition was difficult. Accustomed to freedom, companionship, and constant human interaction, Wojtek struggled at first. Former soldiers visited him regularly, speaking Polish to him, throwing him cigarettes he no longer ate, and reminiscing about the war they had survived together. When Wojtek heard Polish spoken, he often reacted visibly, approaching the fence and standing upright as he once had in camp. Wojtek lived until 1963. He never returned to Poland. Neither did many of the men who fought beside him. Today, statues, plaques, and memorials across Europe honor his story. Not because he was a bear who fought, but because he represented something deeper. In a war defined by destruction, displacement, and loss, Wojtek symbolized loyalty, resilience, and the strange ways humanity survives, even in the darkest circumstances. He did not choose the war, but when it came, he stood with his soldiers until the end. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed learning something new today, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you thought of this story.